If you use the internet on a daily basis, and chances are you do, you probably don't put much thought into cybersecurity. You know, your network connections, the pages you visit, the files you download. You should be thinking about these all the time. Welcome to And Security for All. Your host is Kim Hakim. We're here to help you understand, in general terms, how and why your cybersecurity should be kept in check. Now, here is Kim Hakim.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of And Security for All. I'm Kim Hakim, your host, and thank you all for tuning in. We had quite the weekend for a lot of practitioners over this Canvas attack. So I'm excited about today's show, and we have a lot to cover. I have my co-host, Jonathan Kimmitt, who's the CISO at Alias CyberSecurity, that's going to come in, and we're going to talk about some of the breaches that have happened in 2026, and with the big one this weekend with Canvas. Excited to talk to him because he actually his background, he was the CISO at the University of Tulsa. So I'm excited to hear his insight and where we are with that. And we're going to cover many other things. So it is going to be a packed 45 minutes, could go a little longer. So welcome to the show, Jonathan.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. I don't have any hail going on right now, so it's
I
perfect.
know, that's good. It's nice and sunny and shiny in St. Louis as well. So
yes,
I'm glad we're not hearing that pounding on your facility like we did last time. But
right.
Anyway, so it was perfect timing that we had this schedule because I'm sure this hit a little home for you. I'm not certain if your old university was using Canvas. So why don't we start there and kind of talk about what happened? And, the title of today's show is The Canvas Attack, and the attackers aren't slowing down, and they're not. And I do believe that's why our events are being so packed, because people just cannot get enough information on how to be defensive and offensive on everything that's going on.
Yeah.
So let's just kind of dive into, if you want to tell those that don't know what happened, what Canvas is and what happened.
Yeah, absolutely. So Canvas is a learning management system used by many organizations, not just higher ed. And it's from a company called Instructure.com. And it's how students get in and do their training. They'll do their training, so you can put content up there. You can do quizzes. You can do grades. It's the full learning management platform that people are using. Very big in higher ed. Very big in K-12. It's also very big in organizations for their training platform. Their modules that they do for HR and sexual harassment and all the different things. So, these learning management systems are big things. My old organization did not use Canvas. We used it a little bit in one of our colleges, but we were Blackboard. But we had interacted with Canvas a lot. Now, some of my clients were using Canvas or are using Canvas. So I spent the week dealing with several clients, and there was a couple of different things that happened. Number one, the attacking group got in. They started defacing websites. So everyone kind of saw it. They saw that there was problems, but they hadn't gotten any response from Canvas themselves saying what had happened. That went through a couple of days, and then on Thursday evening or Thursday afternoon, the company Instructure took down the LMS. They turned it off. And unfortunately, this time of year is a terrible time to lose your learning management system. We've got finals happening. We've got graduation happening. We've got grades trying to be recorded. We have all kinds of things happening. So they took it down. It was down for 4, 5, 6 hours. Then it came back up. And we can go into what we think happened, what they relayed to us. But the big issue on the learning management system for higher ed is during COVID, there was a big push to get everything online. So the learning management usage on most campuses skyrocketed because that was how instructors and professors were getting content to the students. Well, it's really hard to have redundant systems in this particular case because you're dealing with a vendor, and having two competing vendors is just not ideal. You're not really going to do that in higher ed. So when in fact, one of my clients had a big push from the leadership to get every single class into the learning management system. So that means every syllabus, every class, every grade entry was in the learning management system. And when they turned it off, and I don't disagree with them turning it off, they had good reasons to do that, but when they turned it off, that shut everybody down. The numbers that we have seen, it's around 9,000 organizations or 9,000 institutions were affected by this. That is a lot of people. That is a lot of students that could not get into a critical function of that higher ed institution or that K through 12.
So, how much do you know about shiny hunters? And I know this wasn't the first time around.
It's not. They've done a couple of big attacks. We don't know much about them. They have a variety of tactics to get in, social engineering, some other vulnerabilities. I don't know much about them. My engineers might have done a lot more research into what they do and how they do it. But this is not the first time we've seen them. We've seen them in some other high-profile attacks over the last couple of years. Different people say different things. Some say it's a nation state actor. Some say it's just from another country. So we don't really know.
So, I know there was some, and we just kind of talked about it before the show, that there was some, a little bit of news yesterday that they were trying to settle on the ransom. And do we know anything about what the ransom was, or have they been keeping that pretty sealed?
They have not said anything publicly, at least all the messages that I have seen. I saw the news article that they had negotiated with the ransomware people with Shiny Hunter to get the data destroyed or to get it back. You want both. I mean, you want them to tell you what data they had so you can go ahead and process your breach notifications and things like that. But then also to get them to delete it. Now, dealing with any sort of threat actor, you never know if they're actually going to delete it or if they're going to hold it for a year and then re-release it under a different name. So there is that issue. We don't know. We don't know where that might happen. But they did come out with the news yesterday, a news article, and they talked about how they had negotiated.
Sorry about the background noise. Technical difficulty. Well, do we know with Shiny Hunters, so was that the first you had heard about them when this attack happened?
No, I had the name I recognized. I couldn't have told you the other breaches they had done, but I'd recognize the name through a variety of news articles and things. You know, we get reports from our engineers of what is happening out in the world. So I recognized the name. So I was not surprised when I'd heard it from, my clients when they were sending me the screenshots of what they saw on the web pages they were logging in. And so that's when we started working into a standard incident response and business continuity to at least get some functionality back. So no, I had recognized the name, but I couldn't have been able to tell you what other attacks they had done. But I know that they've had some other high profile attacks.
So when this breach happened, and again, it's still very fresh and new, and people are still trying to decipher what went on, do you have any idea what the vulnerability would be to the student if that data was not returned?
Well, so, what we started announcing to people when we start getting these reports is the data that was in the learning management system, and Structure did come out and say, what they felt like the data was. So we've got names, usernames, student ID numbers. It had private chats, so some of the chats that you could do within these programs, that was there. So it is FERPA data or protected data from an academic record point of view. They did claim, or they did say that social security numbers, date of births, things like that was not involved, which I would not expect that to be within the learning management system. The information that is in learning management is, of course, what the students need for classes. So that information we know was in the system that they had access to. We believe, or at least based on the information that was provided, that they came in through a separate system that Instructure provides called Free for Teacher. And they were able to get an account. They logged in. They found a vulnerability inside, and they got into a back-end subsystem of some kind. And it could be a database, or it could be another subsystem where they had access to all this information. And then apparently they exfiltrated it out, and then started contacting people to let them know. I've seen reports of they contacted the institutions, and they contacted Instructure directly. There have been some reports that the individual students had been contacted. Now, this raises some concerns, because if you are involved in a breach in Canvas, and you know you have Canvas as your system, you could be a target for copycats or other people emailing you saying, hey, we have your data, give us X amount of money and we'll delete it for you. It could just be a lie. It could be a different threat actor. It could be the threat actor. I mean, the intent of the threat actor is to make money off this, or to extort money. So what we've been letting people know is the data was out there, and to be on the lookout for increased phishing, increased attacks to the individuals because their information got out there, increased extortion possibilities from that, because they might say, I have all of your grades. If you don't want your family to know what you made, give us X amount of money. Now, in some cases, students don't care. In some cases, they do for situations like that. Now, as it relates to institutions or organizations, probably what we're going to see is an increase of fraudulent applications to these institutions, because if student information was out there, depending on what they did get, they might be able to use that along with some of their information they can get off the internet to apply to higher eds. They might be able to get enrolled, and get federal financial aid funds. So, I mean, there's a whole string of attacks that could come out of this over the next couple of years. Now, if the threat actors do delete the data, and again, we have no proof that they do delete it, this could result in another breach later, or at least another release of information later.
So do we have any insight on how it happened, or how Canvas, I know that they named the CISO, so they do have his name out there.
Yep.
And is that CISO making any comments, or
I have not seen any from them. Everything that I've seen is coming from the CEO. They've at least out to the institutions, so the institutions have otherwise been receiving notes. So how it came in, at least as we know from the information that was provided, there was a program that Instructure allows teachers to put their curriculum online, even if they're not an enterprise license. So an individual teacher could get an account and log in and put their stuff, and then they could use it in their class. And somewhere along the line, that system had gotten compromised. Probably what happened, based on, again, the information that was provided, somebody logged in, either got credentials from someone else, or they created credentials themselves, and they found a vulnerability. So they were in the system, they were using the tools, they found a vulnerability, and they exploited that vulnerability. Unfortunately, that gave them access to other parts of the Canvas tool, or the Canvas software as a service. And that's how they've at least said they believe they got in. Now, what's interesting is they had made the note out to people from, I guess it was May 1st was the first email that went out. And it went largely ignored, unfortunately, just because people didn't really know what to do with it. It didn't go to CISOs and IT security professionals or anything like that. So it took a day or two for that to finally make it to where people were seeing it and realizing the importance of this particular issue. And then by Thursday, that's when they thought they had cleaned it up, and they says, hey, everything is functional. Everything's going to stay functional. Everything is good. And then the attackers apparently still had access to the system. They defaced a couple of websites to prove they had access. That's when the infrastructure team turned off all systems of Canvas to figure out how to get them out, to refresh it, come for backups, whatever they did. And then they left off the free for teacher program, whatever that extra piece was. They left that completely disabled and brought everything else back up. I think it came back up 11 o'clock Thursday night or midnight on Friday morning. So about that time frame, we got notices at about 3 o'clock in the morning on Friday that the primary systems of Canvas was back up and running.
So kind of pivoting a little bit, do you feel like this year in 2026 that you're seeing more aggressive attacks than what you've seen prior?
Yes, there's a lot of different kinds of attacks. So the old-fashioned ransomware attacks, we're not seeing as many of those, but yes, we are seeing an uptick. At least it feels like an uptick of attacks. And maybe it's just an uptick of the communication of these attacks out there in the public eye. More news articles, more announcements, more notifications. But we are definitely at least continuing to see a large number of breaches and incidents within the organizations. And I would go to say that we are seeing more different versions of it. So, when we talk about Canvas, they got in, they got the data, and then they were extorting them for money. When we talk about Stryker, which we may hear in a second, that was a completely different kind of attack, different kind of group, but that was more of a hacktivism type thing. And then other ones, their EHRs are going down and other different attacks. So I think we're seeing a wide gambit of kinds of attacks is still having a huge impact on the industries. It's still showing that we've got a lot of security difficulties out in our organizations. And each one is, again, a little different, but it just shows how all of these security issues that we deal with, everything from patch management up to social engineering training, without doing that, we have major issues.
So let's talk a little bit about Stryker, and let's just talk about what happened and what was the resolution, if any.
Well, this one was, I'm going to say it was a fun one. It was not fun for anybody involved, and I get that, but it was an interesting one. What happened was we believe that the threat actor was Handala, I think is how you say that. And they got into the systems, the subsystem, Intune specifically for 365, and they basically wiped a bunch of devices. So I think that there was a payload, there was a process that they did this, but imagine just getting into an organization and sending a command to wipe all the phones, wipe all the workstations, all of that stuff, and just take them down. So that one was it was malicious for sure. I don't know of anything where they were asking for ransomware. They were truly just trying to be malicious. They were trying to take them down.
So where is that been resolved, or is that still?
Well, I mean, yes, they started rebuilding, started recovering where they can. And it freaked a lot of people out because when you have a centralized configuration management system, such as Intune or any of the other ones, if your attackers get into that system, if they can get global access, they can get enterprise access or the old-fashioned domain admin access, they could do some serious damage. I remember years and years ago, we had a mistake at the university where someone accidentally imaged a whole department. So all the computers within that department got a new operating system on them overnight. And it just happened to be a lab image instead of the image that's supposed to be on them. But it erased all their data. Now, this particular attack with Stryker, they got in there and they saw, 100,000, I think it was 56,000 or 60,000 employees were affected by 100,000 devices. And they just said, okay, delete. And all the operating systems, all the tools, everything on there were just erased. And now please understand that some of this is actually normal functionality within the 365 systems. I've had many times where we had a phone stolen or some other tool, a laptop or something stolen, and we went into these tools and we did the same thing. We went in there and told it to erase. We told it to delete all the data. So some of this can be default functionality within these configuration management tools. Unfortunately, when you get a malicious actor, they can also get in there and use those things for malicious purposes.
So are there any lessons that you think the practitioners can learn from the Stryker attack?
You have to be really careful of who has access to your tools. You make sure you have multi-factor on everything. Make sure you have alerting on everything. If someone logs in with the credentials to be able to do that sort of an attack, there should be alerting and notifications on it. Privileged access management is a wonderful thing, so people just can't get in and do it. Now, it's not 100%. You want to make sure that you do as much as you can, but you can't prevent it 100%. Now, that's the downside to this. But I would say that what that got everybody thinking about is, how do they manage their privileged credentials? How do they manage these tools that have such high level access? One of the incidents that happened several years ago was SolarWinds. SolarWinds by default has to have very high privileges to be able to see different things within the environment. And if it gets compromised, then you have all these things get compromised. Well, it's kind of similar here. If you're in tune, your configuration management tools get compromised, however it is, whether it's through a vulnerability or because of credential misuse, that has a huge impact on the organization. So it does, it makes you not want to sleep at night because you're worried about your centralized systems.
So do you think that like the practitioners are becoming more, what do I want to say? Are they becoming more reactive or proactive as far as everything that we've heard over the years, or is it just too hard to keep up? Or
I feel a lot of people are getting, they're getting tired. That's the honest truth. I think a lot of security practitioners, they're getting tired, and not tired of their job. That's not what I mean, but they're fighting the fights. They're going to leadership. They're asking for resources. They're going to the business. They're asking for support, and they're not getting it in some cases. Now, I'm not saying that that's happening everywhere. I mean, I think there's a lot of organizations that are becoming very cautious. But we still see organizations that, they'll go to get a quote for a new tool, and it may be $100,000 a year for that new tool. And from a security perspective, they absolutely need it, but from a business perspective, they can't afford it. I've got a presentation coming up soon, and usually, when I do conferences, I'll talk with them. I'll give them 3 or 4 or 5 different presentation topics, and we pick the one that's going to fit that conference or that theme. But this one specifically wanted we called it GLBA in a box, but it was effectively how to meet security compliance with no extra money. And I'll tell you, it's hard. It can be done, but it's really hard. So when we're talking about organizations and deploying controls and people are fighting to get, let's say, privileged access management, what may have helped Stryker. And I don't know for that for sure, but let's say it was. To get privileged access management, you have to convince people not to have administrator rights 100% of the time. That if they need it, they have to ask for it, privileged access. And then either automatically or with an approval, they will get a certain level of access to do a job for a certain level of time. And Security professional says, yes, absolutely, we want this. We need to be able to protect these accounts. But when you talk to a system administrator, they're like, no, you're getting in the way of my job. You can trust me. I'm a sysadmin. I know what I'm doing. So don't interfere with me being able to do the job. So that becomes a real sticking point between IT and security professionals. That's not a hard thing to implement. Honestly, there's lots of tools to be able to do that. It becomes personality, it becomes ego, it becomes a social side. A lot of my presentations this year, and actually that's what my presentation for the free resource stuff is we can do this thing, but you have to convince the person, not just deploy the tool. Because if you can convince the person to do something different, then that can make security easier, and you don't have to buy anything. You just maybe lunch. Maybe you go and you take them to lunch. But if you can convince people to do things differently, then you can make huge progress with security. Unfortunately, that's the hardest part, is convincing people to do things differently.
Yeah, definitely when, you have the non-practitioners and organizations, and it's probably going through one ear and out the other. So, I don't know. I don't know what, like, the future of how you're going to, because some people are just set in their ways, and, they're just not going to change when they don't understand, what the outcome. I mean, they could end up not having a job. So you think that it would be important to them to do the right thing.
Well, and I think that that's really coming to a head. I think organizations are seeing that. I can't tell you how many organizations I go into in a year where you have people they've been there for 25 years. I have never seen them at a conference. I have never seen them in training. I have never seen them asking questions. They've just done that same thing over and over again for 20, 25, 30 years in that same position. That scares me, because technology has changed. Technology has changed in the last 2 years significantly with AI and all the different things that we're doing. If you're not out there in it, you're not talking to people, you're not asking questions, there's no way you can keep up. So if you have people like that in organizations, I think very quickly organizations going to see it. Senior leadership, CEOs, the board, the president, they're seeing when things aren't happening, and they're questioning it, this is great. This is what we want. So I think you're right. I think that might be a time for them to change positions, maybe retire, whatever. Now, unfortunately, we don't have a lot of people to take their place. That's the other side of it, is we're not getting a lot of people necessarily that have a lot of experience yet coming in to replace them. So we're kind of in a tough position in the industries.
Yeah, we've been talking about that for a long time.
Yeah.
Again, going back to the people issue and not actually what you have implemented in your organization. Let's talk a little bit, because I want to cover a few more of these breaches. The CareCloud Patient Record Breach. What happened with that, and what do you know about that?
So that one was kind of a unique one, because that was an EHR, an employee health record system, that got compromised. Now it affected, that EHR affected lots of healthcare organizations. So it could be millions of health records that were affected by this, but it was just it was an EHR that was compromised, and it was the environment. So they got into the environment. We believe, if I remember right, it was social engineering. They got in on that one. So they got credentials. They got the credentials. They got into the system, and they were able to do some bad things, get copies, do whatever. This kind of goes back to, when we're dealing with, this is the same with Canvas, the software as a service, whether it be a learning management system or an EHR, you're relying 100% on that vendor. There's really nothing you can do on your side as the customer to affect the security of that environment. Now, you can protect your own passwords, of course, but in this particular case, the EHR got compromised, and it affected many organizations. but there was nothing the organization could have done. I mean, they are relying 100% on the vendor to protect their system. And if something happens at that vendor level, there's really not much you could do. Now, the controller, the customer, they still have to go through all the standard HIPAA notifications, breach notifications, all those things, just as if it happened to one of their systems, because they're the controller. They manage those records. But the vendor was the one that did it, that had the breach or had the incident. So this one was, again, it was kind of unique because it was an EHR. It was an EHR used by many organizations, and that's what really caused the problem.
So this is kind of a little off topic, but I was watching something over the weekend and they were talking about Anonymous, and I haven't heard, you were talking about hacktivists earlier, and that is a hacktivist group. Are they still around?
They are. I think one of my guys was talking about them not too long ago, and they are around in some form. So what's interesting is these groups, they change a lot. So you have members coming in, you have members leaving. In fact, I think we've had some shows on that, or you've had some shows where it's talking about these attacking these threat actor groups, that you have new people always coming in and training and then doing stuff. And so, yes, Anonymous is still around. They are still doing things, at least the name of them. It might be a completely different group of people, but they're doing it under the name of Anonymous.
Do you, because I have talked to a few CISOs that actually know some people that are knew some people that were in that organization. Do you feel like they were doing things for the good or at all, or were they primarily being hackers?
So that question comes up a lot for me as a CISO, because I have pen testing engineers. I mean, I've got some great pen testers, and we see these completely different. I mean, the threat actors who are in Anonymous and others, they are very skilled and they are very good at what they do. And I have to take the position as a CISO to say what they're doing is wrong. And I do believe what they're doing is wrong. I understand it. I understand the mindset in some cases. I understand specifically the skill set that they do. But the reasons why they do it, I don't agree with. But I'm not taking away from their skill sets. They are very capable. They're very effective. And they're very skilled individuals. So I'll give them all the credit in the world for what they can do. I just don't agree for the reasons why they do it.
Yeah, I mean, they're still violating people's privacy. So that is the bottom line. There's some people that say they're great, that they're trying to do the right thing in a hacktivist way, but they're still diving into people's privacy. And
it is. And I understand it. And maybe, if looking at this stuff from a different perspective, I could agree that I see why they think it's good. I mean, I could see that point of view, but what happens when they get it wrong and they pick the wrong person or they wrote the wrong institution? So that's really hard. I mean, I respect their skill sets. I respect what they do in terms of technical capability. I don't agree with the reasons.
I mean, I know, as you do, a lot of people in the industry, and I can only imagine in my head a few people that I would think would probably be involved with them because they do think it's, they're doing something good, but it is still promoting hacking.
I mean, I know people. I know we interact. I mean, we have one of our podcasts at Alias is an After Dark show where we have had attackers on and we've talked to them, and we've got a few kind of in line to talk to. And I mean, this would be we blur the face, we change the voice, we do all that, because you have to understand the attackers to be able to defend against them. That's how I look at it. And these are people. And I think that it's important to understand why they are doing what they're doing. I mean, it really goes back to that podcast that I listened to years ago. It was about it was the guy that had, I think it was cat. He had cat as a Twitter handle. And
Oh
somebody,
yeah, I know who you're talking about. It was
yeah, somebody
yeah,
wanted it, so they
yeah.
attacked him for it. And
Mhm.
this was a professional in the environment. He was a security professional. He just did this for fun. We know we'd have people like that. I mean, it's
Mhm.
for sure. But here's the thing: we are teaching people how to do that. It's all about the intent. You know, you take a red teamer that comes out of a training program, and they've got at least a fair amount of skills to be able to go and take an organization down. But it's the intent. We want them to do it because they have permission and they're getting paid to do it, not because they just think it's fun. So it is a real difficult situation when we deal with that in the industry. I mean, you look at some of these conferences. I mean, we had a conference. Oh, here's a perfect example. We had a conference. I guess it was what month? It was May, 2 months ago. Sorry, I'm getting lost in the days. We know we had a malicious person at the conference. You know, it had specifically gotten caught, gotten arrested, all these things. He showed up to the conference and it spread. You know, everyone knew he was there. They didn't want to talk with him. They want to engage him. The conference organizers had to make some very tough decisions on whether or not they wanted to ask him to leave or let him be, or so that it happens. We are in a unique situation where a good portion of our industry are people that have at least some tendencies to that hacking mindset. And then the other half is the blue team side, where I'm, like me, where I'm trying to defend it all.
So Kurt Moss, he has a question. I think it's the same question twice. He's
Yeah.
So, are we still not deploying proper defenses at this time?
Well,
what's your thoughts on that?
We're not. I mean, I go into a lot of organizations that don't have them. They don't have EDR. They don't have any sort of logging and alerting. They don't have anybody watching their systems. They're not doing patch management. They're not doing MFA. They're not doing segmentation. I mean, I can go through the whole list, and we're not. And in fact, I was on a kind of a webinar this morning talking about some of this stuff on AI. And my question to the group was, we haven't been able to do good security and privacy for the last 20 years. How do we expect to be doing it now for this new technology that is very powerful and very dangerous? What makes people think that we can do it there too? And I wasn't being facetious. It was an honest question. It was, how, if we can't deploy the proper defenses, just like Kurt says, how do we move forward? Well, the reality is we can. And I kind of go back to what I said earlier, is we can do this stuff. We know what works. We just have to be able to do it. We have to get the right people making the right decisions to be able to convince people or tell people what we're going to do to protect the organization.
Well, and then we go back to talking about third party, vendors, SaaS platforms, external partners. I mean, how do you even begin to, you have to protect your own organization,
Sure.
But how does somebody, a CISO like you, know that? I mean, who would have ever thought there'd be a CrowdStrike attack,
Yeah. Well, and that's really hard because you're dealing with, you were relying 100% on that vendor. You very rarely will you have redundant vendors in that way. So you have to rely on them. Now, what I tell people is you have to rely on your contract. Your contract is key. That is your liability management. When, what are they going to protect? How are they going to protect it? What is the service level agreement? What is the notification time? All that is built into that contract. I once had a system administrator who told me, this was back when I was at TU, or at the university, but they said that they wouldn't use any vendor unless the vendor allowed them to pen test them. And I sat back and I thought about that for a second, and it's like, no vendor is going to let you pen test them. They're going to hire a pen test company to come in and do stuff, but you can't do that. So there is some trust you have to put into your vendor. Whether or not it's justified, I don't know. I would hope large names, Microsoft, CrowdStrike, Instructure, things like that, they would deploy the right amount of tools, the right amount of security controls to be able to protect my data as I put, my data in terms of my organization that I'm putting in there. But we all know vulnerabilities will happen. We all know that things will happen that you don't have any control over. And that's going to happen. You've got to have your processes to protect against that. Even if that vendor is now gone, they've had an incident, you still got to protect your stuff. And you've got to have your processes to do breach notifications and locking stuff down, business continuity, all this. That's really all you can do. You have to trust them, and you have to be able to continue functioning.
What do you think in 2026 has been the biggest breach you've seen year to date?
Oh, that's hard. I'm going to say the Canvas breach at the moment, because it affected 9,000 institutions. This is millions and millions of students, and it was completely down for them. They shut it down. They shut it off. We don't know how much data they have. Well, I guess they're going to get a copy of it soon, so we'll be able to tell that. But in terms of impact and stress, I'm going to say the Canvas is at the moment, because I saw how it was affecting the organizations. And it wasn't just higher ed and K-12. There was a lot of organizations that provide some sort of training that were also down. But higher eds and K-12s, they were shut down. They had a vendor that turned services off, and those organizations were dead in the water for their primary function of teaching. So right now, I'm going to have to lean towards the Canvas. The EHR, that's a huge impact, and there's a lot of data there. So that's really hard. For CareCloud, that's a hard one to choose between the two. I'm going to say Canvas right now.
And always my heart goes out to the practitioners, because we were in Seattle that day, and everyone was so happy, had a great day, and then that attack happened. And Seattle's big, there's some pretty big companies in Seattle. They were all pretty much represented at our event. So how their day probably turned, leaving an event happy and, getting to network with all their peers, and then that night,
Oh yeah. It was, I was working that day. I had 3 different clients that I was managing on this particular issue. And it was, I probably slept about an hour Thursday night to Friday morning. And I slept in that chair over there. So, it wasn't even, I got to go into the house, and, it was there trying to, because we were trying to make sure people graduated.
Yeah, and it's all strategic, since it happened to be, exam weeks, and, just, I remember Log4, we were running an event in Atlanta, and that attack, I think, happened maybe a day before. We never have an empty event in Atlanta. This was before COVID, and no one could come to a conference. Everyone was dealing with Log4, which I still hear some people talk about to this day, that there's still some impacts from that, but I don't know.
Oh, sure. Yeah. That's still in software. We have that as an issue of just old antiquated software.
So going back to what Kurt said, talking about deploying proper defenses, as we wrap up the show, is there any advice as a CISO? Again, I ask you this all the time, what can people do differently today than they weren't doing yesterday to just hopefully make some sort of impact?
Well, specifically for Canvas, this is what I've been telling people. This is a vendor problem. The vendor is the one that dealt with this. They had the incident, they had the issue. The organization, we have to make sure we have business continuity. And this is becoming more and more of a priority nowadays, because when you have a critical function go completely down, when it's not in your control, you still have to maintain business functionality. You have to make critical services happen. So this is where tabletops come in. This is where practice comes in. This is where communication comes in. This will happen again for sure. There's no doubt about it. When large software as services or vendors go offline, you are almost completely dead in the water. So you need to make sure that you're ready for that. I want everybody in the audience, I want you to pick your biggest software as a service vendor. Maybe that's Microsoft, maybe that's Oracle, maybe that's whatever. What happens if they are no longer? They shut down. What are you going to do as a security professional, as an IT professional, to make sure that your business has some functionality? I think that's critical in this situation.
Well, and I believe that just happened recently. It affected us when Microsoft had an issue, and I think it was an event day, and we had some issues because Microsoft, whatever happened with that. Fortunately, I think it was a pretty quick fix, and they were able to fix things pretty fast. So,
but it happened, and that's the thing. How do we continue? It used to be, back in my day, lots of gray here, but when the bulb went out on the overhead projector, well, they just wrote up on the we didn't even have dry erase boards. We had chalkboards. They would just write everything up there. Well, they don't have that capability right now in some of the classes. They don't have the ability to do it, speaking of Canvas. So you really need to think about, okay, how would I do this different? I remember being in karate class years ago, and the power went out because of a storm. We still trained. We didn't have lights. We still trained. So that mindset of, okay, well, yeah, we don't have a network. Let's figure out how to do it anyway. We don't have computers. Okay, well, let's figure out how to do it anyway. Those are all things that are important. We have to be able to maintain business continuity.
Well, it was interesting in Seattle last week. One of my speakers, I don't know what speaker it was, asked the audience how many in here are doing tabletop exercises. And it was only probably a quarter of the room. So, there's people that don't like to raise their hand, but it was very telling that, again, organizations are not doing enough. And it could be all kinds of reasons. A lot of it is probably funding, I would assume.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've taught tabletops classes. I've taught at different conferences, teaching people how to do tabletops, and I always have a huge amount of people there. They love doing them. They just can't get the organization to do them. So it can be really, really difficult. I love tabletops. I love practicing. I love drilling. I love killing people in my tabletops, because as soon as you kill that first person, everyone's like, oh my, this got dark quick. But if your CISO dies, do you know what to do? Do you have the playbooks? Do you have the run books? Do you have the binders? These are things that people, they don't like thinking about them, but you have to. I'm doing a tabletop tomorrow with an organization, a school, and they have never done anything like this before for school safety and such. And I passed it by, I tested it, made sure it was all going to work. And the person looked at me and was like, we've never thought about that. Ever have we ever thought about that? That's exactly why you do tabletops, is you want people to think differently.
Yeah, I guess it just comes back to, it's one person at a time. It's what we do at FutureCon. It's what you do as a CISO at Alias CyberSecurity, and all of our speakers that come, all of our attendees that come, and you just hope that we can continue, like you said, fighting the fight, because this is not the last attack we're going to see. We'll probably have we could have one happening as we speak, unfortunately. So
Right.
again, have to have you on again shortly so we can continue this discussion. I had tons of points and questions I wanted to ask you, but we already went over 5 minutes. I knew I wasn't going to get into everything I wanted to ask you today, but everyone, Jonathan Kimmitt, who is the CISO at Alias CyberSecurity, if you have any questions for him, just ping him on LinkedIn. He's very, very good about answering his LinkedIn's. Not all CISOs do, but Jonathan does. So
yep, I try to.
Yep. Thank you. I'm glad we didn't have to cut the show short for weather this time.
Yep.
Because we needed every minute.
Too.
So thank you, Jonathan, for being on the show. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for another episode of And Security for All. If you tuned in late, don't forget you can find this podcast any place you listen to your podcast, Spotify, Apple. We're out there everywhere. You can always find it on our YouTube channel as well. So everyone have a wonderful week. We're going to be in Pittsburgh next week. So if you happen to be in the area, please stop by. And if not, you can always join us virtually for our event. Thanks, everyone. And thanks for joining us. And we'll see you next week.